In this episode of Paint Society, I'm going to show you how to repair small holes, whether it's in your project or your bumper cover or whatever type of crack or little void you might have, using a simple epoxy that will secure it, strengthen it, and make it like that hole was never there. Now, to fill small holes just like this, these are some of the things that you're going to need. A rotary tool with a tapered edge attachment, a sanding block, some aluminum tape for the back side of the repair, some paper towels and a cleaning solvent, sandpaper grits P180 and P320, a sander if available. If not, this can be done by hand. This specific epoxy 100 EZ, which also covers plastic, SMC, fiberglass, and many different types of repair materials, along with a glazing putty and a spreader. Also, if you have it handy, a heat gun will help with this project, and some gloves and a respirator. Now, this repair material and repair procedure will work for all different types of cracks, holes, or anything that you might have in a plastic material, carbon fiber, SMC, fiberglass, anything of that nature. Everything besides metal, which you'll have to weld, this procedure will help you. And as we can see, there used to be these holes for a spoiler, which we will not be using anymore. And today, we're going to learn how to completely shave them and get rid of them and make sure that they never come back. Now, one of the main reasons why you cannot just take body filler or any glazing filler and just fill those holes is because once it gets out into the sun and cooler weather, well, that filler is going to shrink and expand, and guess what? It's going to leave a nice circle right where you did the repair, and guess what? Also, it can fall right out. So using an epoxy like the one we're using in this particular video, it's going to bond to the surface, and you're never going to have to worry about it shrinking or falling out, as long as you use the repair methods I'm about to show you. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is really clean it, because we want to make sure any contaminants are off the surface. We're using a pre-painting prep here, and this will help remove any type of silicone or grease that's on the surface that can really just take away from the adhesion of our epoxy. The next thing we want to do is take our rotary tool, and we want to create like a little beveled edge so that it's not as abrupt with the filler. So we kind of want to slope it out just a little bit. So we'll hold it at a slight angle, and we'll use a low speed to really control it. Now, if we take a look, we can see how it has a beveled edge. See how it's kind of a smooth transition, whereas this one over here, it's just a drill hole, and we don't want that because it doesn't really create a good adhesion and a nice bond. So something just like this is exactly what we would want when it comes to doing any sort of repair in a crack or a hole or something of that sort. It's just going to help build up the material much better. We're now going to take our 5-inch block, and we're going to be using our P180 grit sandpaper, and we're going to create an area here right around the holes that is going to be completely sanded with our P180, and this is really going to help for the adhesion of our epoxy and then eventually our glazing putty. And once again, after we sand, we'll do another cleaning. That way we don't have any dust and sand scratches when it comes time to do the epoxy. Now, also another reason why we sand it so far is because remember that when a spoiler is on here, it's tightened down and it's going to cause a little bit of depression or low spot around the hole. So that's going to require some more filler around this area, not just in the hole. We obviously want to cover the hole, but remember, we want it to be nice and flat once it's painted. We don't want to see a larger round depression around each one of the holes. So that's very important to keep in mind when it comes to doing hole or crack repair. It's not just the hole or crack, it's the area around it, which you really need to make sure that you're always blocking out as well. We're ready for our epoxy now. Now when it comes to looking at the back side of the repair is a good inch away from the actual front side of the repair. So there's not a whole lot that we can do from the back side as far as repairing or preparing. Typically on a bumper cover we would sand it the same way and use the epoxy or in a patch. But we're going to use just a little bit of aluminum tape just so that the actual repair material does not come through the other end. And this will be the majority of the repair from the front side, and the adhesion and the structural bond will be all here within this beveled edge. We're now ready for our epoxy. Now this is the only epoxy that I do recommend. So if you're using a different epoxy, you could have some failures. This is a very strong epoxy and it cures within 60 minutes, so you have a lot of time. Now this is the mixing tip, and I do recommend getting the actual application gun because this is going to mix it up 100%. Now if you don't have the gun, then you could just take the back side of, let's say, a screwdriver and push equal amounts onto a mixing board. But again, I do recommend it because if you do not get the correct mixture, it might not cure properly. Now I always recommend putting just a little bit on a mixing board first so that you know that it's mixed equally by the time it gets into the actual hole or crack you're repairing. Now it's very simple. When you go to actually repair or fill, all you're gonna do is pull the trigger, and this stuff is pretty thick, so it's not gonna like drip completely down into the hole. You're gonna have some building strength here, and that's all we're really gonna do. We're going to first fill it, and we're also gonna fill the immediate area around the hole because remember, there was a little bit of a depression around each one of these holes, and we wanna make sure that we're using also some of this material to fill that because it's very strong. Now, of course, you might be able to do the same repair with fiberglass, but these are modern day technologies, and this has a very good strength, okay? Fiberglass can be a little bit of a mess to get just right. Now, some of you might even ask Duraglass or short-stranded body filler, although that is a better option than using your regular body filler. I'm going to tell you, this is going to be the best option when it comes to doing a lifetime repair. This type of epoxy I've used for years now, and I gotta say it works extremely well. This epoxy takes a long time to dry, so you have a good working time here. It says a work time of 40 minutes, but I would try to get all your repairs spread out within about 10. So we don't want to press it too far in. We just want to basically go over it because I don't want it to go all the way deep down into the hole because I want the material to build up on the top side because we have a good amount of space there for material to build up and strengthen. So we're just gonna go over it gently, and it's gonna fall a little bit into the hole, and that is fine because guess what? We can always fill it just a little bit more. Some of these holes were just a little bit bigger than the others when they were drilled out, so some might require just a little bit more. Now, what I'm gonna do here, since I've already spread out the material, right? I've already spread out the material around that depression. I'm just gonna let that self-level a little bit and leave it. Now we can see it's already starting to self-level a little bit, and by the time it's cured, it'll be even smoother. Over on this side, it's looking like I'm gonna do the same thing. Since there is a good amount of distance between the top of the panel and the bottom, you're gonna have some seepage to the bottom. But that's fine. This stuff is very strong and it will harden up on its own all the way through. This one leveled out pretty well on this side, but I'm gonna put just a drop over here. And we're gonna leave it just like we did on the driver's side. You can use the assistance of a heat gun if you want to get it to cure or kick a little bit faster. Otherwise, you can just leave it in the sun. If you leave it in the sun, it might take about a good hour, but the heat gun can kind of get things moving in around a good 10 to 20 minutes. But you don't want to apply heat too close. That can actually make it bubble up and peel right off. So if you're a little bit new to this, my suggestion is just let it dry naturally. If it cures naturally, that's going to be the best possible way for you to get the best possible bond. The only real advantage to using a heat gun right now is that if I see that it's starting to cure and go down into the hole a little bit more, then I can always add just a little bit more repair epoxy without wasting another fluid tip by the time it's dry. Right now, we're looking pretty good. It doesn't look like we need to add any more. And after 10 minutes of going back and forth and really taking my time, we can see that we have a nice surface here for sanding. It's a little bit more built up on the surface. As you can see, the epoxy is higher than the actual panel, which is what we want because now we can sand it down and not use as much filler. Now you can, as I mentioned before, use the heat gun to dry it a little bit, and then that will create a bond at the bottom where it hardens up, so you can pile a little bit more on the top, so you can go back and forth while it's drying and apply more. That way you have this nice surface that is ready to be sanded. On this side, same thing. I noticed that the back holes, since there's a little bit more distance between the actual panel underneath, they actually sunk in a little bit more, so I added more epoxy to these two holes rather than these right here. These filled in fairly well. So now we're going to go ahead, and I'm actually going to be using a P80. That's something I didn't mention we needed, but I see that we're going to need to cut these down pretty hard. And I'm going to use a P80, and I'm going to be using it on the sander to really get it flat to help me out before I do the final blocking. I'll put our P80 grit right here, line it up with the holes as best we can, and we're ready to go. Now what we have here is exactly what we want. We can see that it filled in our beveled edge perfectly. And over in this area, you can see how we had a little bit more of a depression. See how the filler right here, the epoxy filled it in. This is exactly what we want. And I like to use that 80 grit because it cuts it down nice and flat and even. If you don't cut it flat, then it's going to be like a little mountain here, and you don't want that. Over on this side, there's a little bit more depression. You can see that the epoxy took the place of it and filled it in. I always want to use an epoxy to fill in any low spot rather than a filler because it's a much stronger repair material. Same thing over here. At this point, it's ready for a glaze, and when we glaze, we're going to glaze the whole area. Since we've been doing a lot of work here and there, we don't want to just do one small area. We want to fill this whole entire area alongside with this whole entire area. To prepare the area, we're going to once again clean our surface with our pre-painting prep. It can never be too clean when it comes to applying fillers or any type of materials to your panels. Now the reason why I like these sheets is because you can just go ahead and peel one right off and you have a new one. You never really want to mix on cardboard because cardboard can introduce air pockets because it's porous. So something smooth like this is going to be better for any of your fillers or your epoxies, and they're actually pretty cheap. We're now ready for our glazing putty. The reason why I'm using this is because it's a very thin body filler, and it's just going to help us get a nice smooth transition. Of course, it comes with the hardener as well. Now, we're not going to need a whole lot, so I'm going to put just a little bit here on my mixing board. You can see some of the resin is still in there a little bit, and that's fine. We'll get that mixed up. Now, when I'm using my filler, I go from about the middle, and I go out, and that's just all I'm going to need. I always like to use a new spreader or a very clean one, and when you go to mix your filler, make sure you're overlapping it because that is going to mix it thoroughly and properly. You don't want to stir it because that can, again, introduce air bubbles. So you're going to continually mix it until it's one color with no streaks of dark blue in the filler. Now you're gonna wanna work a little bit quicker when it comes to this glazing putty because this will kick within just a couple minutes, especially depending on the temperature. So we have it all mixed up properly, and we're gonna do our best to lay it down smooth, and we don't wanna do it just on the holes because remember, we wanna create a smooth surface between our two working areas, which is where our two holes were. So if we move a little bit quicker, we can get it down a little bit smoother as well. Get it all on, and then we can smooth it out best we can. And after about 15 minutes, it's all cured up. Now from this point, we're gonna be using nothing but a block because we wanna make sure it's nice and smooth. We're gonna be using nothing but a block on our filler surfaces, and then when we up the grit to about 320 for our other surfaces and go over refining it, then we can use our sander. But right now, we wanna make sure we're blocking this out. We'll then skip over to our P320, and we're gonna refine the rest of the surface. So we're gonna refine the surface here that has the P180, and we're also gonna kill this dead paint right in this area that was on the actual panel to begin with. Since it's a P320, it's not gonna be too aggressive, and we can use the sander for it. After it's all been sanded, we're gonna mix up some 2K primer, and we just need a little bit, and then our activator. This mixes up 4-to-1. And I like to add just a little bit of reducer to help it smooth out just a little bit for this particular primer. And we're gonna spray our 2K primer over our repair area. We laid down that 1 coat of primer. Now we'll be doing a second once this gets sanded because we're gonna primer the rest of the car. But I just wanted to show you that 1 coat of primer, the 2K primer, really smooths things out. And now your primer actually gets sanded. And when your primer gets sanded, you'll have a nice even surface for your paint. We can see over here, there's no trace of our holes, and it's completely nice and smooth. So just using these tips and procedures, you can completely eliminate any holes or cracks in your surface of any plastic, fiberglass, SMC, even carbon fiber if you're going to be painting it as well, just by using that simple epoxy and some glaze. Well, that's going to conclude today's episode on filling holes or cracks or whatever your project might entail. And I would love to know down in the comments. So if you're currently working on a project or if you got something in the pipeline, let me know, and let me know if this is going to help you for your own project. Now, until then, this is Brian from Paint Society reminding you, don't overthink it. It's just paint. I'll see you guys on the next episode.